Welcome to my corner of the world. Over to you. Thank you so much for streaming and listening to this podcast. We are 4+ years going strong. I am so enjoying it. Today is no different. This is Memorial Day of 2025 as we release this episode. Audio only, by the way. We went audio only because my guest, like some, this might be the fourth or fifth audio only episode. So we'll be up on YouTube and we'll probably maybe have captions. I'm going to see if I can do that. It's a new skill I suppose I can do. Anywho, this is a fun one. I spoke with Sean Egan. He is an accomplished author and he wrote this wonderful new book called Decade of Dissent. It has to do with the one and only Bob Dylan, who's been kind of back here in the cultural pattern, the cultural fabric of our lives here. Always has been, actually. But since that movie that came out last year, Complete Unknown, he's been talked about a little bit more frequently. Timothy Chalamet did such a beautiful job portraying a young Bob, but this has nothing to do with the movie. And later into the episode, I do ask the author if he had attended a screening of this lovely film. Anyway, he wrote this book called Decade of Dissent, and it really chronicles the ideals of Bob Dylan from 1965 through 1975. His really most important works throughout his career. I don't know if you would call it a heyday. I'm sure Sean would say, no way, that's not a heyday. Has nothing to do with a heyday. It's just there was a period of growth, 1965, which he describes as a really significant, remarkable year here in the States. I do bring this up that the Voting Rights Act had been passed and so much had been going on in the 1960s. And Bob Dylan was there growing on his own, going from acoustic to electric. Everybody, well, not everybody, a lot of people know that story about that transformation. We touch on that a lot. And his most classic albums that you could possibly think of, get into a little bit of that. And just a little bit into the back catalog. Bob Dylan, I wouldn't say is at the top of my faves list, but he is definitely there as part of the canon of stuff that I do listen to. I think the first time I mean, I knew about Blowing in the Wind and those kind of songs since I was a kid. I mean, I always followed a lot of that stuff, but yeah, this is just very interesting and it's very enlightening, and the book is very enlightening. I urge everybody to go out and get Decade of Dissent by Sean Egan. Egan. First name is spelled Sean. He only wanted to do audio only, so I tried correcting as much as I could throughout with the tools that I have to make the sound as best as possible. But I really wanted to do this. I really wanted to talk with him. It's kind of tough when you're doing a phone interview. Phoner is the lingo that those in the biz use. But just to do it over the phone and to try to get decent sound is insanely challenging with what I have here. So I tried balancing that out as best as I could. There might be points where I'm way too loud. I tried bringing myself down and Sean up. So challenging when you've talked for maybe a half hour or so. Anyway, it's just really interesting going into Bob Dylan, talking about his roots, growing up in Minnesota and working for his dad, and seeing the things that he saw growing up. And just very enlightening speaking with him about the projects that Bob had gotten into, especially when he was recording in Nashville. For some reason, that I really gravitated to that. The Blonde on Blonde material, Highway 61 is just an incredible project. Great songs that came out of all those sessions. And he worked with countless people in his career, Bob Dylan. So here goes. Here is our conversation with the one and only Sean Egan, author of Decade of Dissent, out wherever you get those books. I highly recommend. And here we go. So, how did this come about?
I did an article feature quite a while ago, actually, on Highway 61 Revisited, and I interviewed a lot of them who worked on it, and Daniel Kramer, who took the cover photograph. I had a load of material left over because, a magazine article, even this one is about 12,000 words. It's there was still a lot of material I hadn't used. So I always thought that might make the basis of a book one day. This year is the 60th anniversary of Dylan going electric and Highway 61 and bringing it all back home. So it seemed like an appropriate time to do that.
Decade of Dissent. Where did you get that from?
Well, you're always trying to think of a pithy and alliterative title, and that one pretty much was perfect for this particular subject because 62, his first album, right through the 60s, he was a major figure, which is not to say that he wasn't a major figure afterwards, but that was the crux of his career and his influence, and aesthetically as well. That just fell neatly into my head as a good title.
How long did it take you to put all the materials together through your notes, and then finally getting it from very start of the idea to the finished manuscript?
Well, you could say technically 15 years because 15 years ago that I did the article. But in terms of writing, I'm quite a quick writer, so I already had the material that the interviews were done years ago, and so probably about 6 months to put it all together.
Yeah, how many interviews do you say you would have had done for all of this?
How many interviews did I do? Well, I spoke to all of the people. It's about a dozen interviews or more.
Yeah, and a lot through audio interviews. Did you take notes as well? Just stuff that you've had kept in your vault?
No, you just record it. I don't tend to take notes while I'm interviewing.
What impact in that decade of Dissent? That's basically the thesis for the book, is to say, how much influence did he have on the world through his music? Do you feel that he had on culture?
I mean, he genuinely changed the world. Before 1965, there was folk music on one side and there was pop and rock on the other side. And pop and rock, although it could be very exciting and enjoyable, it was the lyrics were basically banal. There were Moon in June stuff or novelty stuff, and folk had intellectual lyrics, but musically it could be a bit staid, even a bit boring. But he put the two together, and obviously somebody else could have done it. Somebody else could have put a backing band behind folky or intellectual song words, but he's the one who did it, and he's a genius, and that made the crucial difference in the public accepting this new genre.
Yeah, and bringing it all back, which he was trying to be at least fair and go 50-50 and say, okay, now I've discovered electric, but I'm going to give the original fans the acoustic on the second side, but still it was outraging folkies. Did you capture a lot of that in the book, saying, hey, are there still people like that even today who felt like, oh yeah, that was the wrong way to go?
No, I think that passed pretty quickly after he proved that intellectual lyrics could work with rock and roll. I mean, he changed what rock was basically, so there was less reason for the folkies to be snobby about it. Before that, I mean, when it happened, it was a real huge controversy. The folkies felt that he was selling out. And I do think there was a sort of spectre of McCarthyism about in America at the time still, even though the McCarthy era had passed. People were very attuned to this idea of people being selling out or keeping quiet or being intimidated into not being radical. And it felt like, to some people, Dylan was part of that process. Not that anybody had intimidated him, but they might have lost his nerve to an extent.
Yeah, 1965 was like, the big harbinger year. I mean, so much was going on in the world, and it all kind of seemed to converge at once. And he definitely seemed to be going along with the times. Did a lot of people feel like, yeah, that was the right track to go, was to like, you got to change, you got to roll with the times, and then even lead people with your music?
Well, he converted a lot of people. He made people realise that that you could marry the two types of music, and of course a lot of pop fans who previously listened to the Beatles and the Stones, suddenly they realised that popular music could give them so much more than it had, on an intellectual level, not just on a visceral level.
Yeah, yeah, and you do touch on his upbringing and how that had shaped him, his upbringing in Minnesota, and he couldn't stand the rigidity of his father, who he had detested, just being in the business, and that seemed to shape him during the Eisenhower era.
Yeah, he came from a very middle class family up on the border with Canada, so it was very cut off from the kind of society that he wanted to be in, which was more radical and more urban. His dad gave him a good upbringing materially. Emotionally, I don't think he got much from his father. I think he was quite close to his mother. His dad ran a furniture business, and when people who got furniture from him on hire purchase couldn't keep up the payments anymore, the furniture had to be reclaimed, and Dylan was given the job by his father of helping to go and retrieve those goods, and he really hated it. He hated the humiliation of the people that he was having to take the furniture back from, and that's an example of his social conscience, and the fact that he did have sympathy for the underdog from a very early age, even though he was very privileged himself.
A lot of empathy, I think, would have to come into play with that, just seeing how the less fortunate were being treated and having just furniture repossessed had to lead way to a lot of the material that came out much later, especially in the mid 60s.
And then before that, of course, the protest songs, which are far more nakedly political. There's a lot of theories about why he wrote protest songs, and some people say that his girlfriend at the time, Susie Rotolo, was a primary influence on that, because she was very left-wing and very much an activist. But I don't think any of his protest songs were ever insincere. I don't think he ever wrote a song that he didn't believe in, although she might have. Everybody wants to impress their girlfriend, of course, so she might have acted as a spur to those songs, but they came from the heart as well.
Yeah, one track that really stands out, Chimes of Freedom. He wasn't willing to just like say, oh yeah, I'm gonna play to just this one demographic. It left him, with bigger questions with a tune like that.
Well, that's a sort of transitional song. It appeared on Another Side of Bob Dylan in 1964, which is the album which first started to worry his older fans, because there were no real protest songs on it. But Chimes of Freedom was a sort of protest song, but much more vague and poetic and allusive, just a generalised statement of sympathy for the underdog. It's a nice song. It sees him moving away from stuff like Masters of War, which is bluntly stating a real hardcore political message.
Yeah, and you call 1965 the Annus Mirabilis of that year. It's a year of significant change. What other examples made that such a year of significant change besides the war? We definitely had civil rights here going on in the United States, which I would think had a pretty big impact as well on Dylan.
Oh yeah, I mean, 1965, Annus Mirabilis is because he was absolutely everywhere. He released 2 albums, bringing it all back home, and Highway 61 Revisited. Like a Rolling Stone was a huge smash hit single, even though it was the most unlikely single you could possibly imagine. But he was covering his songs. I mean, the number of not just the Byrds and people who had hits with his songs, but every artist who was trying to make it was covering Dylan's songs. So he was all pervasive. And if you listen to the Beatles' December '65 album, Run Soul, that is like the Fab Four formula that they'd already established, but diffracted through the style and the technique of Dylan. It sounds like a sort of Dylanized Beatles album. So even titans like that, he was having an influence on them.
Oh, for sure. With the Beatles and Dylan meeting up with them in that year and making it really a huge change, which led to so much creativity after that. So I'm sure he was on that same trajectory. That's just a really fascinating breakthrough. But what's really amazing is 3 albums in 14 months and got through it
Yeah,
with a little help from Albert Grossman, who was the manager at that time.
if you can call it help. Yeah, I mean artificial help.
Exactly.
They call that his fans call that the amphetamine rock trilogy, which gives you an idea of how he was able to maintain this incredible schedule. Because Blonde on Blonde, which came out in 1966, was a double album, and in between dates, he was in between recording dates, he was playing live dates, going around the world, being booed to the rafters because the folkies and the audience didn't like the fact that the second part of the set featured a backing band. You know, the psychological effect of him on that must have been huge. You know, to go out there and just be booed. So he was very frayed around the edges at the time.
Oh yeah, I think anybody would be. It's just that's just so much to take in at once. Blonde on Blonde, a very, very interesting collection, double album recorded in 1966 in Nashville and done in a pretty conservative town at that time, but you had some real serious talent on that release with Robbie Robertson and Al Cooper. It's just got to be, which you have definitely chronicled in this book. It's got to be like another, building on that breakthrough.
Yeah, he took Al Cooper and Robbie Robertson Robbie Robertson with him to Nashville. They were his New York buddies, and the session musicians in Nashville. They entered into this wholeheartedly. They never seen anything like Dylan before. They never heard anything like Dylan before, but they played beautifully behind these weird songs that he brought them with their weird time signatures and bizarre lyrics. You know, they were used to playing mostly country sessions. He had people like Charlie McCoy playing with him. Fantastic musicians. It was a very personal album. There were no songs like Desolation Row or Chimes of Freedom on it. It was all about himself, the journey that he was going through. A great collection of songs, like all double albums. This was the first double album, by the way, by any rock or pop artist. But like all double albums, you can point to tracks that you would happily lose, but the core of it, stuff like Visions of Johanna, absolutely majestic recording. The core of it is absolutely incredible.
Yeah, and someone said that the songs were on a small scale in subject matter, which has been one of those chief things that people would say, but it's still amazing amount of 12 bar blues as well into this. So it's just again making that again another left turn. And then after that gave way to what people are always looking at as the first bootleg was the Basement tapes.
Yeah, it seems like Dylan was a revolutionary, and whether he intended to be or not, he recorded these songs, which later became known as the Basement tapes, when he was in Woodstock after he'd had a motorcycle accident in '66. And his manager, Mr. Grossman, was sort of pressurizing him to keep coming up with songs. So if he wasn't going to record, which he didn't seem interested in doing at the time, then at least other people could do cover versions of them and keep the money flowing in. And they were really weird, quirky songs with bizarre lyrics. And also they were recorded in a basement. And so they had this really basic, musty timbre to them. And they started leaking out to the rock aristocracy because Grossman wanted people to do covers, and the rock aristocracy played them to their fellow musicians. So although the public wasn't hearing them, the influential musicians were, and that started influencing the way that they recorded. And they started turning their back on psychedelia and the excesses of studio experimentation of '67. And then finally the public got to hear them, or Dylan's versions, because they heard the cover version. But when this bootleg record came out called Great White Wonder, which had a selection of unreleased Dylan songs from across his career, but especially the Basement tapes. So he caused this entire industry, the bootleg industry, that didn't have anything to do with him. He didn't instigate it. Then people started releasing thousands upon thousands of bootleg records of all artists across the board.
How long did he keep Albert Grossman? How long was he on the scene? And Albert Grossman, I believe he's worked with other acts as well.
Grossman basically ceased being his manager at the turn of the 70s, although there were, because of contractual reasons, there were a few years where he was still technically receiving monies from Dylan, even though Dylan had got rid of him. It was a motorcycle accident that was the turning point. Dylan used the accident, which was fairly minor, in order to get out of this insane working schedule that Grossman had put him on. At that point, he began to get rid of Grossman from his life. And a lot of the songs on the Basement tapes seem to be about Albert Grossman, and not necessarily sort of broadsides or denunciations of him, because Dylan himself was beginning to examine his own conduct over the last few years and had become a lot more self-critical and a lot less judgmental. But certainly he's become very disillusioned, Grossman.
Yeah, as many in the music business. I keep reading all these books about how, yeah, management or, lawyers. You look at the Beatles with Alan Klein and people like that. They learn their lesson way later, that they had been dealing with somebody pretty shady. So it's always a lesson learned, especially with artists from that era. Uh, what's really interesting is John Wesley Harding from late 1967. That seemed to be yet another turn that that Dylan was finding himself in a different way, which you would say that was castigating both himself.
Yeah, it was a sort of continuation in a way of the self-criticism that you hear in the Basement tape songs. But whereas there's a lot of humour in the Basement tape songs and a lot of sex as well, in John the Wesley Harding, he just it's a concept album, really. He's the first track, John Wesley Harding, is about this rebellious figure who if you read the lyrics or listen to the lyrics, he's venerated by people, and but he's not really deserving of the status that he's been given by them. And then throughout the rest of the songs, he's exploring the psyche of somebody who has done bad things and has reached a state of hubris. And then the final two songs, he sort of disavows all of that and celebrates love. And the preamble to those final two songs is The Wicked Messenger, where somebody is told that if you cannot bring good news, then don't bring any. It's almost a dialogue that Dylan is having with himself throughout the whole album, and couching everything in metaphor and beautiful poetry as normal. But it really is a journey that he's describing of an individual, and that individual can only be him.
If you had to tell somebody who knew nothing about Dylan or anything like that, what would be the first album you would say that person should pick up and take a deep dive into?
But it has to be Highway 61 Revisited. I mean, it starts with Like a Rolling Stone, which is this blistering denunciation of somebody, absolutely dripping with hate. Although it is open to the interpretation that the you that he's talking to in the song is in fact himself. He does that a lot. He uses the second person in song to explore his own psychological state. But either way, whichever way you want to listen to that song, it's an incredible classic, unprecedented song. And the album closes with Desolation Row, which is this 12-minute tour de force. It's like an exploration of the world and an examination of everything that's wrong with it. It never gets boring, even though it's 12 minutes long. So when you think about the fact that the album is bookended by those two Titanic classics, that would be enough in and of itself. But in between them, you've got some the more incredible songs like Queen Jane Approximately, and Just Like Tom Thumb's Blues, and It Takes a Lot to Laugh, It Takes a Train to Cry, which is one of the most beautiful and tender songs that he's ever written. I mean, all of that is all on one album. It's just absolutely staggering.
Yeah, an amazing album. And Ballad of a Thin Man is one that really stands out to me with the
Got to mention that. I mean,
yes. Oh my gosh.
I believe I'm right in saying that's the first Dylan song with a bridge, with a middle eight. And that's another thing that doesn't get mentioned much in the discussion of Dylan and the 1965 and Dylan Goes Electric. That was the year that he began writing his own melodies, because up until then he'd done that thing that folkies do of taking a age-old melody, so old that it's out of copyright, and putting his lyrics in it. But he decided that he'd write his own tunes. And if you listen to Highway 61, it's the first album that he made where you can't point to tracks and say, oh, he got that tune from Nottingham Town or No More Auction Block or some other eons old folk song. And he turned out to be a very good melody writer. There was no reason that he would necessarily be that. And he was already a great lyricist. But he was very, very competent melody-wise as well.
What poetry really inspired Dylan? Obviously, he gives F. Scott Fitzgerald a name check in there as well. But like, what poetry did he grow up on that really influenced him?
Not sure there was any one particular poet. Obviously, everybody, when they think of poetry and Dylan and influences, they think Dylan Thomas. And Dylan himself has said he got his name from Dylan Thomas after denying it for decades. But he's such a sort of mischievous, playful, and convoluted character that you can't necessarily believe him when he says something. I'm not sure there's much connection between Under Milkwood and Desolation Row. I'm not too sure that you can point to any individual poet as influencing Dylan. He's, a lot of this stuff he sort of he invented it. Obviously, he references Ezra Pound and T.S. Eliot in Desolation Row.
Mm-hmm.
I'll leave it to other people to decide whether they think there's any influence of them on his style. But basically, the man's unique.
How much did the record company get involved in the creation of these? Like, oh my gosh, you're closing out an album with a 12-minute song. Was obviously, in the era of coming off just singles, but it'd be Dylan and the Beatles and later the Stones and all that coming out with actual concept albums. How tough was that with these record execs? Were they okay and comfortable with a 12-minute closer like that?
I'm not sure they were comfortable, but I've never really heard any anecdotes of the record company trying to interfere on a very serious level with Dylan's product. I mean, there was this back when he was making Freewheeling Bob Dylan, which came out in '63, and that was his breakthrough album. There was this track, John Birch Blues, Talking John Birch Blues, which they insisted not be on the album, but that was for reasons of libel, because he did compare them to Nazis, which is a little bit over the top.
Mm-hmm.
But otherwise, I think they pretty much left him alone because he was so influential, and the cover versions were pouring in, and they whatever misgivings they might have had about how unusual and revolutionary his music was, I think they pretty much understood that he should be left to his own devices. The only real problem that he had by 1965 was petty things like Daniel Kramer was commissioned to do the cover photograph and bringing it all back home. And the art director of Columbia Records said, no, you can't do that. We need a proper professional, established photographer. And then Albert Grossman told this man in no uncertain terms that Daniel Kramer was going to take the photograph. And Daniel Kramer ended up taking the photograph and creating one of the most iconic album covers of all time. So basically, I think Dylan was left to go his own way.
Yeah, and lucky for him, especially when you're talking through the 60s, 70s, and beyond, how record execs get involved and try to bring in A&R people to be involved in the creation of any kind of a project. What in 1969, trying to get him to come to Woodstock, that wasn't to be, but he played another festival.
Yeah, the only reason that Woodstock was originally going to be taking place in Woodstock, which is, that was a pretty out of the way place in upstate New York. The only reason for that being its location was that everybody knew that Dylan lived in Woodstock, and Dylan had been off the road since 1966, was giving almost no interviews, and so he was considered to be, by the standards of the time, a recluse. And they wanted the people putting together the festival wanted to entice him out of semi-retirement, and Dylan just wanted them to leave him alone. He didn't feel too much connection to the hippies. Of course, in the end, Woodstock couldn't take place in Woodstock, and it moved to Bethel, about 70 miles away, I think.
Yes.
Dylan, in order to get away from the Woodstock hordes, accepted an invitation to play the Isle of Wight festival. The Isle of Wight is a little island off the southern coast of England. So he went over there and put the distance of the Atlantic Ocean between him and the hippies.
Yeah, very distressed at that time. It was probably a better venue, I would imagine, at the Island of Wight, coming into the madness of Woodstock.
Well, the people wouldn't leave him alone in Woodstock. He had people, fans following him on the lonely country roads of Woodstock, and came home to find a couple in his bed once, and heard people on his roof and things like that. And he was plagued by the nutters.
Wow, what a mess. So then later on, going into 1970 with Self-Portraits, I would say that you wouldn't recommend this one if you were to go through the Dylan catalog. That was, talk about a beyond left turn.
Well, that was the ultimate attempt to get the hippies and the people who considered him the king of the counterculture off of his back. He deliberately made a terrible album in order to say to these people, look, I'm not the person you think I am. You can stop bothering me now. Although, having said that, he has, and I mentioned earlier that he's a very convoluted character, he has given interview quotes where he's quite angrily insisted that it was a great album, and the people who slagged it off weren't listening properly to it.
Yeah, really. Yeah, I should give it a listen. Definitely. It's you kind of wonder, I mean, with a catalog so huge, it's good to go back in there and you give it another listen, and it could be a whole different experience.
Yeah, I mean, if we didn't know who Bob Dylan was, it's a bit like Paul McCartney and Wings. If we'd never heard of the Beatles, maybe we'd think Wings were a fantastic band.
Yeah.
And maybe if we had no preconceptions and pre-knowledge of Dylan, we would accept Self-Portrait on its own terms. But the trouble is, a double album with cover version with a lot of bland orchestration is not what we imagined Bob Dylan epitomized.
That's a good parallel, comparing that to the Wings situation, which is, we look at this many years later, it's like, well, the bip bop links are not as bad as some of the rubbish we could hear later on in our culture. So that's very interesting. And then you get to Planet Waves. Basically, that was accompanying his tour. That seems to be pretty much kind of lost in the canon.
Yeah, it's a nice little album. It was his comeback album because after Self Portrait, he put out New Morning a few months later, and then he released nothing, no album for about 3 years. So not only was he off the road, but he wasn't even releasing records. And then he decided to make a live comeback, and by the 70s, rock music was being staged properly instead of in converted cinemas or ballrooms. He was able to play arenas. But by the 70s, you needed a product to sell if you were on the road. You couldn't just, apropos of nothing, put on a gig. So he slapped together Planet Waves. And it's a very unusual album in his canon because he's not really usually a confessional songwriter. But if you listen to the album, it starts with "On a Night Like This," where he actually says in the lyric, "We've got much to reminisce," and then he seems to be writing about his childhood. The song "Hazel" that seems to be about his first sweetheart back in Hibbing, Minnesota, Echo Hellstrom. And then the record climaxes, he's got Forever Young on there, which is about one of his children, and the record climaxes with Wedding Song, which is about Sarah, his wife, the person who'd shared his life for the last 8 years or so. So it is a very personal record and a very good record in part.
And then he just seems to top himself. This is a good pinnacle. Blood on the Tracks, 1975. Now we are 50 years out from this. This is like basically the latter part of your book, Decade of Dissent. Yeah, the inspiration and everything that's come with this album just makes it such an unbelievable classic. How long did it take him to put that one together?
Well, not long, because Wedding Song came out in '74 on Planet Waves, and Blood on the Tracks, which is clearly about the collapse of the relationship with Sarah, is '75. So in less than a year, he's put together these songs, which are beautiful and exquisite, but also agonising because they trace the trajectory of decline of this marriage and this relationship. It's very sad, really, that Blood on the Tracks was the first album that could live up to his classics of the '60s, but in order to reach that place, he had to endure the collapse of his marriage. So his personal life was in disarray, but it led to the revitalization of his professional life.
Yeah, what a classic period. Blood on the Tracks just really just captures it so well. And then he just went on to so much. Obviously, you've probably seen the film on Bob Dylan that just recently was released. Did you have did you see it? And then if so, how did you feel about it?
Everybody assumes that I've seen the
I know. I want to say if, because I haven't.
actually, yeah, I actually haven't seen it.
Okay, two of us.
The trouble with films like that is that they have to take liberties with the truth, and
Yeah.
they have to conflate events, because otherwise it gets poetic, it gets repetitive. They also have to give it a conventional narrative arc of beginning, middle, and end, when life is not really quite so tidy and poetic. So
Yeah.
things like that, they sort of irritate me. When it comes on television, I will watch it out of curiosity, but it's so problematic watching something like that, and so I didn't feel any great compulsion to actually go to the cinema to see it. But I'm glad it's released because younger people today, they just do not understand precisely why Dylan was so important and why him going electric was so controversial. Plus, it keeps his name and his music in the public eye, so that people who think that Taylor Swift is the be all and end all of music will be surprised of the reality.
Yeah, I think it's smart and you're helping doing that too, keeping Dylan's music alive like that. Beatles just, they got Paul and Ringo who are really out there still pushing it and reminding people where all this great music came from. But it's good that an author like yourself, and I could understand that, looking at a movie like that where they're taking liberties with time and facts and just basically at times saying, oh, they're just really making it up. So putting out a book like this is great for the history books. And yeah, definitely hats off to somebody like yourself who can do this. And it's out there. Decade of Dissent. Where can we find this amazing book?
Publisher is Jawbone, and yeah, it's available in all good bookstores and Amazon, etc. It's nicely done as well. The publisher is it's a paperback, but it's got flaps, or like it's a hardback, so it's quite a handsome product, and hopefully people will agree that the contents are quite worthy as well.
Well, sounds like you're happy with that and you're happy with how it's getting published. And we'll definitely look forward to it. I appreciate you doing a phoner here with me this afternoon and best wishes on this. Are you going to be doing a book tour?
No, I'm doing a sort of this kind of thing,
Yeah.
virtual tour, starting work on my next book soon. So I've got to concentrate on that.
That's good. That's very good. Yeah. And traveling can take a lot out of you and it's hard to do both things at once. Well, I appreciate you phoning.
Okay, well, nice to talk to you, and glad you enjoyed the book, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah, absolutely. Take care.
Thanks a lot.
Bye bye. And that was wonderful, wasn't it? I'm glad that we brought up self-portrait. Not too bad. These many years later, it came out in 1970, and it was just like kind of that low point in his career. Everybody's got those. So that was very interesting to bring that up. And of course, all those classic tracks from Highway 61 revisited, released in August of 1965. So yeah, wow. Anyway, yeah, Blonde on Blonde. That might be one of my more favorite ones. Just the way that landed just came very close to one of my favorites. And then Blonde on the Track. So yeah, some days I like that one better than Blonde on Blonde. But wow, an incredible, incredible career. Just very prolific and just an amazing, huge catalog for sure. How about that? Didn't see the film, and neither did I. I probably will at some point. I don't go out as much as I used to. I used to go out, gosh, all the time. I used to go out to movies. I don't go out nearly as much as I used to. And I love film and television, all that stuff. It's just, I don't get out much. I just don't run to the theater. There's just nothing, a lot of things are just not even really worth it. If I'm in like more of I got to be in the mood for more of those summer blockbusters now that we're heading into summer. I don't know. Top Gun was just this jingoistic thing. It was fun. Editing's great, great sound in it. I don't know. It was the last time gosh, maybe it was the last time I was in a theater. I can't remember now when that Top Gun sequel came out, how many years ago that was. Anyway, Bob Dylan, wonderful, wonderful artist to talk about. And Sean Egan, wonderful author. Decade of Dissent. Get it wherever you get those books. Thank you so much. Thanks for, if you're listening to me by now, for listening through this entire interview. Just really wanted to get this up. Not the easiest thing to do over the phone, especially internationally. I thought maybe I would get somewhat of a better connection. I have Wi-Fi calling here. I don't know. It's on that end. It's just it just sounds horrible. I really think that mobile phones just sound worse than they ever did. Maybe they even sounded better 20 years ago. I don't know what it is. They're terrible, and I'm not a big fan of talking on them. I always feel like the connection's gonna break. And I got Wi-Fi calling in here because this area where I live just is absolutely horrible for mobile phone usage. It's absolutely just atrocious. I can go on and on about that. It's terrible. Wi-Fi calling definitely helps. It calms my nerves. I really have like this anxiety, like talking on the phone, because we don't really have landlines much anymore. Very few of us do, and I always feel like I'm going to get disconnected. There's got to be a phobia about that. Somebody look that up. Anyway, thanks for coming along with me this far and listening to this entire interview. If you made it through all this way, thank you so much, and I hope to keep doing more of these. Not phoners though, unless somebody can get me. I probably need to invest in probably getting a mixer of some kind. I don't have that. I don't have that much money. But yeah, probably if you send it through a mixer somehow, my mic is nice. Somehow there could be a balance there. I'm sure there's a way to do it. I just don't want to spend the money. I'm sorry. Anyway, if this made any money for me, maybe I would. I don't want to sit here and whine about money. Anyway, it was just a fun conversation. Really enjoyed it. And thanks for sticking around. And hope to do more of these soon. Take care. Bye.